From Washburn University in Topeka, KTWU presents Ballot Box 2004, the race for the United States Senate in Kansas.
Greetings, I'm Bob Beatty from KTWU and Washburn University. Welcome to the 2004 U.S. Senate Candidate Forum, a program which we hope will provide you, the voter, with the information you need to cast an informed vote for the person you'd like to see represent Kansas for the next 6 years in the United States Senate. 2 years ago, Kansans elected Senator Pat Roberts to the Senate for another term. On November 2nd, voters will decide whether current Senator Sam Brownback also is retained. 3 of the 4 candidates who would like to replace Senator Brownback are here today. They include Lee Jones, representing the Democratic Party, Stephen Roselle, representing the Libertarian Party, and Horace Edwards, a member of the Republican Party who is running a write-in campaign. Reform Party candidate George Cook was invited but was unable to make it, and he has asked us to convey a written statement for him on the air. There are 4 major issues in this campaign: education, immigration, the war on terrorism, trade. In education, we must fully fund the No Child Left Behind Act and the Head Start programs. We should also get quality teachers into the classrooms with a forgiven loan program for those seeking to become educators. For immigration, our borders must be secure with our military and immigration revamped. We revamp immigration by allowing corporate sponsorship of immigrants for 5 years, allowing them to choose citizenship or to return home after that period. With the war on terror, we must declare this in the Congress, as is required in the Constitution. We define our enemies and put forth our plan and allow the military to eradicate the terrorist threat. We take our soldiers out of Iraq cities and place them on their borders, allowing Iraq to settle their internal problems amongst themselves. Trade is our key issue. 12.2 million jobs have been exported under NAFTA, costing the U.S. $243.5 billion in revenues. We must immediately repeal NAFTA and return the prosperity of the United States. A statement from George Cook. We invited Senator Sam Brownback to this candidate forum, but he declined. He did, however, provide us with a 5-minute videotaped statement that we have agreed to air for you. We will air this statement and then proceed with the forum.
Hello, I'm Sam Brownback. I'm sorry I can't be with you today. The Senate was in session longer than planned, working on important business to Kansas and the nation. And although I had hoped for more time to travel the state and listen to my fellow Kansans on the campaign trail this past month, I'm pleased that the Senate was able to pass very important legislation on issues like Homeland Security, intelligence reform, and tax relief for working families. Jobs, security, and values. These issues are important to all Kansans, and these are the issues I'm fighting for in the U.S. Senate. Jobs. We must grow the economy and continue to create jobs in rural and urban parts of our state so that everyone who wants a job can get a job. I've authored and supported several bills that put together will grow our economy with the overall goal of a 3 to 5% GDP growth rate per year. I've sponsored 2 initiatives that will help create jobs and grow the economy across Kansas. The new Homestead Act will help in rural Kansas, while the Empowerment Zone tax bill will help in urban areas. In rural Kansas, we have many counties that suffer from high outmigration. Just as the original Homestead Act of 1862 provided vast amounts of public domain to private citizens, we must revitalize our own spirit of creativity and enterprise to allow Kansas to grow and adapt today. For counties that are losing population, we must spur economic growth and retention. For those who choose to live and stay in high outmigration counties, I support repayment of college loans, credits for home purchases, and new incentives for businesses to expand or locate in these areas. For urban communities, I support the creation of tax enterprise zones. Enterprise zones would allow people and businesses to choose between the current tax code or a simple 17% tax rate. Whether individual taxpayers or small business owners, they will be able to choose whichever tax option serves them best. This will spur job growth, economic growth, and offer a real-world, low-risk test to a solution to tax code reform. These plans offer a real choice for people and businesses by creating powerful incentives that would promote both growth and opportunity. Also, we need to simplify and flatten our tax code to create opportunity instead of confusion. Recently, I supported a tax relief bill for families that extends marriage penalty relief and the child tax credit. Over 500,000 Kansans will benefit from the extension of this tax relief, allowing them to keep more of their hard-earned money at home. Security. We must provide security for our families and for our nation. The events of September 11th and the recently released 9/11 Commission report proves the need for our nation to look to protecting our future rather than looking for blame in the past. Many of the recommendations in the report were recently passed as part of a cohesive legislative package that reforms the intelligence community and creates a National Intelligence Director to serve as the principal intelligence advisor to the President. It is clear that we must improve both our collective emergency response capabilities as well as significantly increase and coordinate our intelligence operations. We must be vigilant as a nation to avoid complacency. We will not let the terrorists have rest or sanctuary anywhere in the world. I've consistently voted to support our troops and will continue to do so. They are serving magnificently. And finally, we need to return to the values of faith and family and freedom, values that are the foundation of our Constitution and of this great nation. Without these critical pillars, America cannot remain strong. We need judges who support the Constitution, not ones that try to rewrite it. America is stronger when we take steps to recognize the dignity and beauty of each and every human life, regardless of its location or age. And we're stronger when we fight to protect the institution of marriage, the bedrock of our culture and society. The best place, not the only place, but the best place to raise our children is in a strong, committed family with a mother and a father. I'll continue to fight for Kansas. I'll continue to fight for jobs, security, and values. It's been an honor to serve you in the Senate these past 8 years. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your time. I'm Sam Brownback, and I would appreciate your vote.
Well, we've heard from George Cook and Senator Brownback. Now let's hear from the candidates that are actually here with us. Mr. Jones, I'd like to start with you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Bob.
Simple question, why are you running for the United States Senate?
Well, I started looking at the issues here in Kansas, and education became the #1 issue. When I started studying that, I looked at how Washington affected the schools here in Kansas. So I started looking at the various records of members of Congress, and I found that Sam Brownback has one of the worst educational records of anybody in the United States Congress. He has voted against major funding 27 times for our children, even against Head Start. He has voted against putting money in to make our numbers of our students in our classrooms much smaller. He's voted against Pell Grants and student loans. I have 2 college kids. And then he's proposed a voucher system that would take very precious dollars we already have and put them into private institutions that can actually discriminate who they allow in their classrooms. Then I started looking at the deficit. Biggest in history, went from a $5 trillion surplus to a $3 trillion deficit in 3.5 years. We're paying something around $1 billion a day in interest now. And for every family in the state of Kansas, that's $100,000 if we had to write a check to pay off the government for what happened in the last few years. Now, since 1980, the wealth has really shifted in this country. It's about 20% of the wealth was held by the upper percentage of the government, of the wealthy people. Now it's 40%. So I think our whole country's going in the wrong direction. And then this is not a race about party affiliation, Democrat or Republican. It's about Sam the person, what he stands for and how he votes, and what Lee Jones stands for. And I think that the people of Kansas will directly understand that as this debate and this forum goes on. My campaign treasurer is a noted Republican banker from Topeka. I have bipartisan support because they understand we have to take care of issues for the state of Kansas. We have educational issues. We have issues dealing with the war. We have all kinds of tax issues that have been unfair. So that's why I'm in this race.
And we'll get into those issues, certainly. Mr. Edwards, why did you decide to take on this race?
Well, thanks for having me here in this forum. I think the people of Kansas want and deserve an alternative to the senator they have now. I think that among the candidates that I'm the credible alternative to Senator Brownback now. Now, the people of Kansas tend to be responsible, they're generous, and they're patient. I think that under the circumstances, the good faith and trust they've lavished on the senator has actually been betrayed. And I think that the people with whom I've talked in the process of getting to this spot in the campaign have indicated a strong desire for something new, some more progressive vision, and a better voice for Kansas. And I think I ought to offer that better voice to express a vision that is more progressive.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Rosio?
Well, thank you for having me here, Bob, and thank you for that question. Now, I stand for the proposition that each of us has the right to live our lives in any way we choose, so long as no other person's rights are violated. You own yourself and the fruits of your labors, not government, which now takes nearly 50% of what we earn in taxes and to an alarming degree dictates how we must conduct our lives. We are forced to participate in pension, health care, education, and a multitude of other schemes whether we wish to or not. By taking so much of our earnings, we are forced to rely on government rather than ourselves. As your senator, I will work to restore private enterprise, industry, and markets and place the individual back in control of his life. I will work to reduce the federal government to its constitutional functions, reducing its size, expense, and intrusiveness. It can then focus on doing its job one, national defense and homeland security, and doing that job without violating our individual rights in the Constitution. I will always be against Congress giving the power to wage war to just one person. I oppose reinstating the draft and am against the forced extensions of enlistment that has become commonplace in our military. Don't waste your vote sending the same politicians back to Washington. Vote for libertarian candidates and send a message that you will no longer accept their spendthrift ways and their encroachment of America's precious liberties. Thank you.
All right, thanks. And just to be clear, Mr. Edwards, you're a write-in candidate, that's correct?
I'm a write-in candidate,
Okay.
That's correct.
And this question goes to you. Obviously, a U.S. Senator deals with foreign policy, and we'll get into a lot of domestic policy as well, but let's start with a question that's very important, and that's Iraq. Mr. Edwards, did you support the invasion of Iraq, and has the post-invasion period, in your opinion, been handled correctly?
Did I support?
The invasion of Iraq, yes.
No, I did not support it, but I was not in a position to have a vote or to voice an opinion about it. I thought that the invasion was premature if it was required at all. In my judgment, the invasion of a country as we did should be really and unmistakably a last resort. It was not a last resort. All of the diplomatic initiatives had not been exhausted, in my judgment, and it was not clear that the weapons of mass destruction as the first cause of being there were indeed there. There was a level of uncertainty among, I believe, the citizens of this country, and certainly in my mind, about it.
Mr. Rosio, did you support the invasion of Iraq?
No, I thought the invasion of Iraq was a bad idea from the get-go. I opposed it then, and our Congress didn't do their job in declaring war. They gave that authority to just a single person. If the Congress, the Senate, and the House had have taken the time to have hearings to examine what they were doing and declare or not declare war, I feel we wouldn't be in Iraq now. We wouldn't be bogging our children and grandchildren down with this incredible debt, and we wouldn't be increasing the hatred that the rest of the world has for America and increasing the likelihood of more terrorist attacks. We need to remove our troops as soon as we expeditiously can. The Iraqis have oil revenue. They can rebuild their own country. We can't force them to be democratic any more than we can force them to be Christians. They have a right to their life, their country. We did them a favor, we hope, by taking out Saddam Hussein, though that wasn't the justification President Bush gave for that war. And the Congress, if they had done their job, it would be likely we wouldn't be there. The whole Congress should be ashamed of themselves for what they did.
Mr. Jones?
Oh, that's a very important issue to the state of Kansas, because we have a number of military people that are in that action. You know, Sam Brownback is the subcommittee chairman that handles the issues in the Middle East. So everything goes through his subcommittee. He becomes our expert for our government in the United States Senate. Now, Sam voted to go over there. However, right prior to the vote, he made a statement in the Marysville newspaper that Saddam Hussein was not a threat. We have him bottled up. We know where he's at. The whole country's a 2/3 no-fly zone. He's not a threat. Iran's a threat. I agree with him. Iran's a threat. But he turned right around and voted to go with the president into a very unpopular war. I agree that we shouldn't have been over there. We should not have gone. We should have had international community involvement. However, now that our troops are over there, I support our troops 100%. But what has this administration done? They have not given them proper equipment. We've heard those stories where they do not have Humvees that have canvas curtains. I've met soldiers who were home on leave that told me their flak jackets only come across here. And then they have no food and water in some of the major cities. Yet we got people like Halliburton over there staying in these fancy hotels in these guarded areas. And by the way, Sam Brownback did receive contributions from Halliburton.
Mr. Roselle, I'll start with you. Obviously, Americans and a lot of other people are being targeted by terrorists, especially since 9/11. In your opinion, are we fighting the war on terror the way we should be, and would you do anything differently to fight the terrorists?
Yes, I would do things a lot different. I did support President Bush and his actions he took in Afghanistan to go after al-Qaeda and take out the Taliban, who were aiding international terrorists. But we should have stayed focused there on eradicating al-Qaeda, on finding and bringing Osama bin Laden to justice. We shouldn't have moved our focus to Iraq. We should have stayed on target. We had the sympathy and the cooperation of the world. We could have done a lot with that, but we have lost all that goodwill. And our allies don't trust us. Our intermediates definitely fear us now. They see us as an imperialistic threat. It was just the wrong way to go all the way down the road, and we're inflicting damage to the Iraqis. We're costing them lives. Our military men are dying, and we're in a quagmire. It's another Vietnam. I thought we learned no more Vietnams, but I guess we didn't.
Mr. Jones, are we fighting the war on terror the best way we can?
Well, first of all, I think, like I said, I think we made a mistake the way we went about going in there. Now, the enemy, and that's what we were talking about for 9/11, retaliation against the people that caused this. Now, we all must remember that all but 3 of those citizens were Saudi citizens. Do we go bomb Saudi Arabia? No, because it's oil. It's big interest. And we have to look after that interest because of the oil money. We ruined, as the other gentleman has said, some international community was really behind us when we had our tragedy on 9/11. We have wasted that. We had the world community. In order to take care of terrorism, the world community has to say that's enough. We're now the bully on the block. And what happens to bullies on the block? Eventually people will gang up against you. And that's the position we're in now. Nobody wants to help us out. And that's the problem we have. We have to change it around and get the international community back involved.
Mr. Edwards?
We should have made a complete job in Afghanistan. And we should have not gone on a new military adventure in Iraq or any place else until we did that properly. We should have seen the problems of terrorists in the larger context and see that the Israeli-Palestinian issue was critical in that. So there should have been priority placed on finishing the job in Afghanistan, in being an honest broker between the Palestinians and the Israelis to diffuse a lot of the the problem that besets us in that part of the world. And we should have kept our powder dry and been vigilant about the flaws in our protections against terrorists here and elsewhere. But we should have been playing our diplomatic card and really going after the root causes of terrorism and the reason we're anathema to so much of that part of the world.
Well, let's talk about that issue, and I'll start with Mr. Jones. The Middle East, and you mentioned Saudi Arabia, Mr. Edwards mentioned Israel and Palestine. What should be the U.S. policy in the region regarding Israel, the Palestinians, even as you mentioned, the Saudi Arabians? Are we going about it the right way?
I think we've, like I said, wasted a lot of goodwill. Let me back up a little bit to Afghanistan. Sure. We had bin Laden where we wanted him. We have the best special forces in the whole world. Our military special forces are the best. We had him bottled up. And what did this government, this leadership in this government do? They turned it over to the warlords to go get him. Now, these are the same warlords that 3 months before was defending him, and the same warlords that control 75% of the opium made in the world. Yet, so that's kind of a strange scenario. Now, I was on the White House lawn when they signed the peace accord, and I thought that that was a big breakthrough because there was a real, genuine interest to try to bring countries together. I do not see that right now. And I don't see that in Sam Brownback either. He could do a lot of things in his position as the subcommittee chairman. But what I see, he continues to stir up the nest over there. We have to sit down. A lot of things Jimmy Carter talked about for the Middle East is to have a peace zone over there, so to speak, especially in the Holy City, because there's 3 religions over there that was founded in that Holy City, one right next to each other and one a block away. But to have a religious-free zone, I think that would help because they're fighting over that same territory. But Sam's position is that one country needs to control that. I do not agree with that.
Mr. Edwards, you think we can do things differently regarding Israel and the Palestinian situation?
Yes, I do. I think I said before that we should be honest brokers in that conflict. The Palestinians and the Israelis have a centuries-old problem between them. And the United States has made several attempts to do something about that. If we were to use our armed forces for seeking peace, then there probably would have been a much better use of the staging, for example, we had encircling Iraq. I mean, yes, Iraq, following the strike against Afghanistan that we didn't complete, there would have been a marvelous opportunity to have redeployed some of those forces to provide some protection for the Palestinians and the Israelis in common from each other while they seek a way to iron out their differences, because a part of the problem is the continuing violence. And the United States, as an honest broker, should indeed be working on engaging them in constructive talks and doing something about their security, which is their basic problem. Mm-hmm. That would do more for terrorism in this country than any single thing I can think of.
Mr. Rosiel, Israel, Palestine, the Middle East?
Yes, the United States should end its unquestioning military support of Israel and should encourage the creation of a Palestinian state. Back in the 1940s, when Palestine was partitioned, the idea was that the Israelis would have their own area and the Palestinians theirs, so displaced persons would have had a place to relocate. That hasn't been done. This has been a powder keg just building up for decades and decades, and the solution is nowhere at hand until the Palestinians get their own land. I believe Israel is now willing to do that, but I don't blame them one bit for defending their territory, but we shouldn't be giving them military support. In the past, maybe it was more necessary, but today I feel they're fully capable of supporting themselves, and of course Americans are free to donate, or should be free to donate, to the Israeli military or the Palestinian military. Not the terrorists, though. I guess there isn't any Palestinian there. Maybe I misspoke there. But we should not we should not support one side over the other. The only solution that's ever going to work is for the Palestinians to have their own area. And we should directly move in that way and defuse that situation, because it could touch off World War III. And another thing, the Muslims would have less to dislike us about if we ended our military support for Israel.
May I pick up on that?
Sure.
That point. Since part of this session has to do with being constructively critical of Senator Brownback, one of the key foreign policy mistakes I think he has made has to do specifically with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Senator Brownback introduced a resolution to move immediately the capital of Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. The same resolution requires that before there's any recognition of a Palestinian state that you hear us talking about, that prior to any recognition of such a state, that the whole international community, which would include Russia and France and Germany and the folks we're not so fond of at the moment, that whole international community would accept Jerusalem as the undivided capital of Israel. That is a certain formula for setting up an embassy that has to be protected, which setting up an embassy that has to be protected with American military forces, and interposing ourselves right in the middle of a problem that we're not doing much to solve.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else have a comment?
Well, that's like I said. I support Jimmy Carter's, because that's what he does. He tries to get peace in the world and fair elections and things. And he said that it should be set up as a religious-free zone. So all religions that have the cradle of their beginnings there be able to go freely and support that. That's some of Sam Brownback's problems. I said stirring up the hornet's nest is because he keeps pushing one religion over another into that area, and it's wrong.
Mm-hmm. Let's move on to domestic issues. We'll start by the order with Mr. Edwards. Two-part question, but not double the time, hopefully. Did you support President Bush's tax cuts? And regardless of your answer, don't the tax cuts contribute to the large federal deficit we're running?
This gets back to one of the reasons I'm running for U.S. Senate. I have had tremendous success in being chief executive of a large company in this country and being owner of a small business, having dealt with issues of jobs and economic development and the like. And my view of the tax cuts is that they are not the kind of economic stimulus that either works for business in a fashion that grows an economy and provides jobs, and it is not fair, that is, the tax cuts as they are not fair to the population at large. They really are skewed in the direction of those who need them least, and the ones who are not likely to invest those kinds of private funds in the growth and expansion of business, on one hand. And the second part of your question is, does it increase the federal deficit? If you're going to conduct a war, and you've got a crisis in education, and you've got a shifting demographic in terms of the kind of jobs available, and the age of the population, and the skills that go with the technology, you can't afford the kind of tax cut we have. And yes, it does put on the credit cards of future generations a terrible debt.
Mr. Rosiel, we have tax cuts and the deficit.
Well, libertarians support tax cuts in nearly every area, and so I do support President Bush's tax cuts. However, I don't support his spending increases, including roughly 10% increase on non-defense discretionary spending. The Congress is writing more pork barrel legislation than they have in their entire existence, and it's all being put off on the children and grandchildren to pay. This is the second part of the question. I'm here rather quickly.
Well,
But libertarians would pay for tax cuts by downsizing government, and the federal government needs to be reduced to its constitutional core functions so they can spend time on what's important, national defense. You don't do it by borrowing money, because a tax cut to stimulate the economy is countervailed when the government borrows so much money, because then business can't borrow funds in the market to expand. So
under your platform, if there's a tax cut, there needs to be a downsized government to pay for the tax cut.
reduce spending to pay for any tax cuts, but we need all that Bush has given us and more.
Mr. Jones?
This is one of the key parts of my campaigning. You know, 3.5 years ago, like I said earlier, we had a $5 trillion surplus. And since the last 3.5 years, we're $3 trillion in deficit spending. And that amounts to about $1 billion a day on interest, which is the third biggest capital outlay of our government now. We did not have it 3.5 years ago. The tax cuts basically went to big corporations, the wealthy. Average wealthy person got $78,000 back tax cuts. 3/4 of our Fortune 500 companies do not pay any taxes or get a tax incentive. In those tax cuts of the last time around, there was actually tax incentives for jobs to be outsourced overseas. Sam Brownback voted to give tax cuts to organizations, companies, to send our jobs overseas. It's very unfair the way the tax structure has been. Now, with that, when you have those cuts combined with everything else that's going on, it's going to put us in a tremendous deficit. And Sam was a deficit hawk like I've been a deficit hawk. He used to have a scoreboard up in his office showing how much the deficit is. The deficit went away with the Budget Reconciliation Act of 1993, which I supported and worked on to get it passed. Now, since the deficit's back and he took his scoreboard down, he hasn't put it back up because he is part of the problem. He has taken the money out of the government, and he's brought up the biggest deficit in the history of this country.
All right. Mr. Rosio, let's talk a little bit about education. Clearly there's differences in funding for schools in Kansas and schools across the nation, but is there anything that can be done at the federal level or in the Senate that you can do to improve education?
Yes, we can get the federal government entirely out of education. It's too important a job to trust them with. Just 10 years ago, the Republican Party had a contract with America that, among other things, promised to abolish the Department of Education. Now we have a Republican president that is spending unprecedented amounts on public education and dictating to them how they must conduct their schools and the curriculum, and this is just a total outrage. Whatever the issue, Washington taxes up dollars from the states and then turns around and makes them sit up and beg for pennies. This has to stop. All those dollars should stay in Kansas for us to determine how best to educate our youth. And as far as the state remedy, I recommend a voucher system that would save the state's money immediately, because the voucher would be less than what it costs the states to educate a child. The parent would be able to take their child anywhere, private, parochial, secular schools, and so this would gradually build up the private school sector as it gradually brings down the public school sector, because the libertarian view is that we need to privatize education all across the board.
Okay.
But to get there from here, we need vouchers to build up the private school industry so that they can educate our youth, so parents can get the education they want for their children, and so parents are in the driver's seat once again. If you don't like the education your child is getting, you can take them somewhere else. The competition for the education dollar will increase the quality and availability of education for us all.
Mr. Jones, is there anything you can do in the Senate on the education level?
Well, first of all, you had a mandate by the federal government on No Child Left Behind, and the requirements to fulfill that funding from the national level is $78 billion over 10 years. Yet our federal government has not sent those dollars back to Kansas. That's part of Sam Brownback's problem. Federal mandate by this administration, supported by Sam Brownback, not sending the dollars back to the state of Kansas. Now, in order to get some cover for this election, Sam and some of the people got together and passed a bill for 2 years of funding for $3.8 billion. That's about enough funding for half of 1 year. So they can say, I voted for it. So that puts unfair pressure on schools and school districts. And they have now cut as much as they possibly can. And they've gone the extra mile. I've talked with administrators, superintendents, all about this issue. But Sam voted to cut funding for such things as Head Start. We could have tax relief on such things as getting our dollars back from Washington to reduce the number of children in the classroom. And I am opposed to vouchers because what voucher system does, it erodes a public school system. Public school, as far as I'm concerned, is a cornerstone of democracy. It sets us apart from other places. Vouchers also can be given to private institutions that can discriminate who they allow into their school systems. So 27 times Sam voted against funding for public education, and some of those votes he turned around and gave multinational corporations tax incentives in the same vote to outsource our jobs. His priorities are wrong.
Mr. Edwards, is there anything that can be done in the Senate for education?
We hear a lot about the Constitution, and it requires providing for the common defense and promoting the general welfare. A quality education is a part of the necessities of promoting the general welfare. So therefore it is a governmental concern. The federal government has got a marvelous opportunity to do something about the quality of education, but it needs to be very specific about it. The needs of preschool and early child development, while the basic foundation for education is taking place in the years up to 5 years of age. The die is cast by that time, and the success of people who come along later is determined in large measure by a quality public education system, which then needs to distinguish between the needs in very poor communities, which would be a Head Start type program, and the No Child Left Behind, which tends to make a more level playing field for middle income and lower level people in education, as well as the ones who are in less advantaged communities.
Okay. Mr. Jones, we'll start with you for this round. A number of candidates in Senate races across the United States are stressing what many call social values issues. Abortion, the ban on gay marriage, etc. As Senator Sam Brownback was an original sponsor of Senate Bill 2082, which is called the Constitution Restoration Act, which clarifies that federal courts do not have jurisdiction to hear cases brought against a government or government officer for acknowledging God. So these issues seem to be a priority for Senator Brownback. My question for all of you, starting with Mr. Jones, are they a priority for you in your campaign, and is this what you're stressing in your campaign?
I think Sam's maybe needs to put on his minister robes versus being in the U.S. Senate, because that seems what he concentrates on more than taking care of the issues of our children. Separation of church and state is something that's kept this country going for over 200 years. He's trying to intermingle it. And you have a constitution that says you have judicial review. But what he's trying to do is separate out your rights, for example, to take a case to the Supreme Court. No review. In other words, he's trying to make the legislative branch of this government stronger than, legislative branch is government stronger than a judicial branch. They have 3 branches of government. That's what makes us so strong, because they interact and they have checks and balances. He's trying to take one away the checks and balances, much like what happened in the 30s if you look at what happened in Germany and other places around the world. I'm very concerned about the direction that Sam Brownback is trying to take this country.
Mr. Edwards?
We do have the 3 branches of government, and of course it would be a fatal error to abrogate the responsibilities of the judiciary by passing any law that tends to place limits on the judicial branch of the government by the legislative. That certainly is antithetical to any constitutional separation of powers in the first place. As regards the larger issue of liberty and freedom and promoting the general welfare, there is really no proper place for the substitution of any personal choices, including those of Senator Brownback, in matters of love and marriage and family and medical care, and whether or not the taxes of religious institutions are are used in certain fashions or not. So I think that the senator is off base and out of touch with all of the people I've had a chance to hear from in this state. He is way off base and therefore doesn't represent their views.
Mr. Rosile, the social values question?
Well, the Constitution does grant Congress the power to set the jurisdiction of the federal courts and to create all the inferior courts, the courts inferior to the United States Supreme Court. So this would be a proper function and could get the question of abortion back in the states. But Mr. Brownback pushes a very religious-orientated issue. I would refer him to Amendment 1, where no law respecting establishment of religion be passed, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. You know, it's both a grant, it's both a securing our right to profess our religious faith, but it's also a protection that no religion is forced upon us. And basically that's what Brownback and many other Republicans are trying to do. They're trying to force their religious views on society, and that is distinctly said by the Constitution not to be proper. No religious test shall ever be required to hold a public office. And what I really think needs to be done is that we allow the, we can stop the courts from ruling on abortion, leave it to the states. And he's also pushing, he wants to leave it to the states for that issue, but then he's pushing a anti-gay marriage amendment. And I think Dick Cheney had it right a few weeks ago, referring to his own daughter and her sexual orientation. He said he thought that freedom meant freedom for everybody. I don't think there's a more libertarian statement that can be made. Freedom is for everybody, whether you agree with one's religion, whether you accept their ethnicity, whether you agree with their politics.
All right.
They have the rights of an American citizen if they are such, and they should be respected in each and every right, including the right to marry or have a civil union, and the right to a safe and legal abortion.
Well, after the response to John Kerry's mentioning Dick Cheney's daughter, I'm not going to go there. Mr. Edwards, this question to you and then to all of you on Social Security.
Well, excuse me a minute.
Yeah.
My main reference to the fact of his statement of freedom, I thought freedom meant freedom for everybody. That's the only reason I brought it up. I meant nothing else. I just was referencing the statement a little bit.
Mr. Edwards, if there are no changes to Social Security, many say the fund will be in a dire state down the road. What specific proposals would you support to keep Social Security solvent in the future?
Well, there are two problems with Social Security. We talk about saving it as it exists now, and then there's the whole issue that has been proposed as a remedy of privatization. It really two separate issues here. Mm-hmm. Number one, Social Security, there is no fund. People who are working today pay the beneficiaries of Social Security today. If you stop working and generating income to pay those benefits, they won't be there. So there needs to be something done that breaks that hand-to-mouth existence, number one. The second thing is that the popularity of dialogue about privatization is, of course, unless you do something else, a recipe for disaster, because if you start to divert a portion of what's being earned today, paying benefits today, off so that they are in people's individual accounts, any portion of it, then obviously there's an even greater gap with the people who are beneficiaries. Therefore, there are a couple of short-term measures, one of which would be, in fact, with a lot of fanfare and a lot of education of the people, especially those who are beneficiaries now, will be soon, to have them understand that there's a need to, with the aging of the population, to increase the age at which benefits start. That'll buy some time while you change the basic model for retirement and old age benefits here.
Okay. Mr. Rosile, Social Security?
Well, Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. It always has been. Money's paid out to recipients from those who are currently paying money in. And there is a fund there. Unfortunately, all it is Treasury notes. That's all that the Social Security system is allowed to purchase, and basically that puts that money in the general fund that Congress then spends at will. And then when it's time to pay out benefits, well, then the taxpayer again have to pay off the owners of the Treasury bills.
So are you against Social Security or just against how it's run?
I'm saying that we need to privatize Social Security into individual pension accounts, and own it, because you really have no rights to anything under the Social Security system as the law is currently written. You only have what Congress deigns to give you. Whereas if you have and own your own pension account, you will not be dependent on government or an employer, and that money will go to financial institutions that will loan it to business, and stimulate the economy.
Okay.
And there's much better ways to handle it. Government gives a poor rate of return, and they're not accountable, and you own nothing. We need to privatize it totally, and those currently receiving Social Security or about to, we can sell off unneeded federal lands in the western states, buy them an individual annuity that they will own, and they will be independent of the security system, supposed security system, I like to call it. And so we can get beyond it, because it's nothing but a political football. So much, so much of our lives have become a political football. Let's get it back in the private sector.
Let's go to Mr. Jones.
Well, Bob, like all the issues, you can find my positions on my website, which is www.jones4senate.us. I'm not convinced there's anything wrong with the Social Security system. The guy that's been proposing it is Mr. Greenspan, which was the head of the commission in 1982. At that time, he proposed privatizing it. Now, I don't think there is anything to be done to fix it right now, but there is a big inequity most people in the United States do not understand, even reporters as I talk with them. After you make $87,900, you don't pay any Social Security taxes. So I, as a blue-collar worker, pays the entire time on my income, versus a person makes $5 or $10 or $20 or $50 million a year, they only pay on the first $87,900. So there's an inequity in the system. I say if we're going to adjust it all, and they think they need to make money and get more money into the system, then you take and tax everybody fairly, all the way up. Now, as far as raising the age, I don't think we need to raise the age. I'm opposed to that, because I think the system is there. I think that if we have to have more funding, then we go ahead and tax all income, and that's only fair. We might be able to actually drop the Social Security tax if we add the income.
Let's keep, time's running short, we'll keep the answers hopefully short. Mr. Rosile, what's the state of democracy in the United States and in Kansas? I ask that because we're having a debate here, and the presidential candidates debated, but across the nation, for example, congressional seats, many of them go unopposed, that are not competitive. Some people complain about the Electoral College. What's your assessment of the state of democracy in the United States?
Well, that's quite a broad question,
Sure.
with you asking for a short answer.
Test of your acumen.
It's good that you directed it to a third-party candidate, though, because third party and fourth and fifth parties bring more people to the polls, give more people a voice. The duopoly that we're under now needs to be extinguished. Republicans and the Democrats are really just two wings of the same party. But back to democracy. Democracy is mentioned nowhere in the Constitution. We're guaranteed a Republican form of government. And I always thought it would be much better if the governor had a State of the Republic speech instead of State of the State speech. You know, we're a Republican form of government. We have representatives who represent us at our legislators. We've granted the federal government limited and specified powers and authorities. They need to do their jobs, and you'll find in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution what those jobs are. That's what they need to focus on. So we're not supposed to be a democracy. One of our failings right now is they've convinced us all we are a democracy, so we're ignoring minority and individual rights, and that's wrong.
Right, Mr. Jones?
Well, I think we got two things, and one directly related here about democracy, and I think it's probably the best form of government I've ever experienced, I know. But Senator Brownback, the bill he introduced to restrict judicial review. That is taken away from democracy. If you look at the Patriot Act's got some real problems when you don't have your constitutional rights to have a lawyer. The government come in and say, you're a problem for our government, you're a terrorist, and they can lock you in a cell, you can't talk to anybody. That's not what America's about. That's what Russia was about, Germany during the 30s was about, all those kinds of things. So my problem with is people like Sam Brownback, that are trying to erode what democracy has been in the United States.
Mr. Edwards?
The democracy has some problems, as indicated by the lack of participation in democratic processes. The issue here in Kansas is especially indicative of what goes on in the country at large to some extent. We have a lot of disaffected people not participating. Part of the reason, I suppose, all three of us are running is in order to try and do something about that. There's a spirit of disengagement because of a sense of a lack of vision and some plans to do something about it. Therefore, I would think that it needs some revitalization, and that, of course, is what I would offer as an alternative to what's being done now. There are lots of particulars. We could do the whole laundry list, referring back to the senator's speech about that. It is not as well as it ought to be.
Running out of time, but the U.S. Senate deals with, the senators deal with very important constitutional questions. A yes or no on a constitutional question, should there be an amendment to change, to allow a foreign-born person to become President of the United States? Yes or no? The Arnold Schwarzenegger Amendment would probably be called. Yes or no?
No, I don't think.
Mr. Edwards? Yes or no?
Yes.
I think it's time, yes.
And should Kansas change its electoral college rules so it would be proportionate to the vote, like Colorado is thinking may do November 2nd? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
The states can do it if they want to. Leave it up to the states.
Okay. We have time for basically your last thoughts, about a minute, minute and a half each. We'll have to cut you off if you go much longer. We'll start with Mr. Jones to finish up this forum.
Well, once again, Bob, I thank you for having us here. I am very disappointed, Senator Brownback. This is about the 6th forum I've been in that Sam has not been able to show up. I think he can't run on his record. He can only run from his record. The reason why I got in this race was education, but I think the three things that I dealt in my campaign is moderation, tolerance, and true compassion. And I think you need somebody in the middle that can work with both parties, that represents all people in the state of Kansas. I have a history of that, both here at the legislature and in Washington, D.C., when I represent working families. I have a history of getting people together to get things done. Sam Brownback is not. He's so far right, he forgot where he came from. That's why I'm running, and I want you to vote for Lee Jones for U.S. Senate.
Okay. Mr. Edwards?
There's a strong division which leads to an unhappy situation in Kansas. And my being a candidate is to serve as a change agent to lift the vision of the state with regard to a whole host of issues about which I'm concerned, especially things like stem cell research, which is a creative initiative both for providing for the common defense and promoting the general welfare in terms of its benefits to the people. And there needs to be a clearer voice, a better voice, a brighter vision that moves Kansas to that stance about what the Constitution and what it means and how it ought to be implemented.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rosiel?
Yes, well, Libertarian candidates run to win, but we also run to give the voting public the opportunity to send a message with their vote, to send someone to Washington and the state houses, lesser government offices. The Libertarian Party has over 600 currently serving officials around the United States. We can document that we have saved American taxpayers billions and billions of dollars. And when we get to Washington, we will save the American taxpayer trillions and trillions of dollars, and we'll fight for your liberty every day. Our founders and our forefathers fought and died and gave the ultimate sacrifice for what? For liberty. And that's why I'm a libertarian, and that's why I'm here representing the Libertarian Party, and that's why I ask for your vote on November 2nd. We fight for liberty for each and every American every day. Liberty is the highest good, and the most benefits flow to the individual and society, both mentally, spiritually, and socially.
All right, thank you. Well, that's all the time we have for this 2004 Kansas Senate Candidate Forum. I'd like to thank Lee Jones, Stephen Roselle, and Horace Edwards for taking the time to appear to discuss the issues and their campaign platforms. I'd also like to thank the great people at KTWU for the production of this program and their commitment to public affairs programming. We hope that this forum will help to make you a more informed voter and that you'll remember to vote on November 2nd. But now it's time for us to go. Goodbye.